Elvis Presley walked into the White House on December 21, 1970, believing he was just there to help his country. But within minutes, he broke a rule no civilian had ever dared to break in front of a sitting U.S. president. What Nixon whispered afterward, caught only on a private memo, still unsettles historians today. Washington, D.C., December 21, 1970. The sky hung low and gray, the kind of cold winter morning where the air felt heavy even before you breathed it in. The White House lawn was brushed with a thin layer of frost, and the gates hummed with nervous energy. Protesters had been marching nearby for weeks because of the war. Sirens were routine now. Even the Secret Service felt the tension in their bones. Inside the West Wing, the halls smelled like pine from the Christmas wreaths, but the mood didn't match the decorations. A strange request had been delivered just after sunrise, and it was now sitting on President Richard Nixon's desk. The name written at the bottom of the letter made everyone look twice. Elvis Presley. Not a manager. Not an assistant. Not a fan club representative. Elvis himself. He claimed he was traveling the country quietly, studying America, and wanted a private meeting to help the nation. He also insisted he didn't want the press involved. That alone made Nixon's aides, especially Egil Bud Crow, raise their eyebrows. Men who needed attention usually begged for cameras. Elvis wasn't asking for any. The letter had arrived in a plain envelope, no warning, no appointment. Just a signature in blue ink and a promise that he could be at the White House within the hour. Crow later said the room went unusually silent when he read it out loud. Maybe it was the odd timing. Maybe it was the loneliness between the lines. Or maybe it was simply because this was Elvis Presley, and nothing about him ever felt normal. Outside the White House gates, a black limousine eased forward. Drivers honked. A dozen tourists pressed against the metal bars, whispering, unsure if they believed what they were seeing. It was rare for celebrities to show up without a plan. It was even rarer for them to walk toward the most protected building in America with nothing but a velvet suit and a small stack of papers. Elvis stepped out wearing deep purple velvet, a high collar, and gold belt buckle that caught the winter light. He looked like he had stepped out of a movie instead of a car. But there was something different in his eyes. Something tired, like a man trying to outrun a feeling he couldn't name. His boots crunched on the gravel as he walked. A gust of wind pushed against him, but he didn't slow down. One Secret Service agent whispered, "Is that really him?" Another murmured, "What does he want with the president?" Elvis walked toward them carrying a sealed letter. He didn't have gloves despite the cold. His fingers were red from the air. A purple scarf around his neck fluttered behind him like a small flag. He looked confident, but there was a softness in the way he clutched that envelope, almost like he wasn't sure what would happen next. The guards moved instantly. One stepped in his way. Another scanned the area. A third reached for his radio. The quiet hum of tension wrapped around them. Elvis simply said, "Sir, I have a message for President Nixon. He'll want to see this." His voice was calm, steady, almost gentle. The guards guided him inside, but every step felt like part of a movie scene that wasn't supposed to exist. The White House rarely accepted surprise guests, especially not ones dressed like Vegas royalty. Yet here he was, walking under the golden lights of the entrance hall, breathing the scent of polished wood, rubbing his cold hands together as he waited. Crow looked up from his notes when Elvis entered the West Wing lobby. He later described the moment in his diary. He looked hopeful and lost at the same time. Maybe that's why he took the letter from Elvis so carefully, like it might break. Elvis nodded, grateful. "I came on my own," he said quietly. "No press. No one knows I'm here." That alone was shocking. Why would the most famous man in America come completely alone? What was he afraid people might think? What was he fighting inside himself? As Crow read the letter, his eyes widened. Elvis was asking for something no one expected. Something bold. Something almost unbelievable. A request only a desperate man would make. A request that would pull him straight into the Oval Office, and toward the rule he would soon break. The sealed letter sat in Crow's hands like it carried fire. He read it once. Then he read it again slower. Elvis wasn't asking for praise or protection. He was asking for something no one had ever officially given a civilian. He wanted to become a federal agent at large. Crow blinked. The title didn't exist. It wasn't a real role, not in any handbook, not in any federal office. It was something Elvis seemed to believe America needed. Someone who could move between cities quietly and help young people resist drugs. The words were written in Elvis's uneven handwriting, parts smudged like he had been gripping the pen too tightly. Crow felt a chill. What kind of pain pushes a legend to ask for something like this? And why today of all days? He looked up at Elvis, who was standing near the Roosevelt portrait, shifting his weight anxiously. Outside the window, a protest chant rose for a moment and then faded into the cold. Elvis glanced toward the sound and whispered, "Kids are losing themselves out there. Someone has to try." A guard coughed softly, reminding the room that time was ticking. Crow cleared his throat and said, "Mr. Presley, this is unusual." Elvis nodded. "I know." His voice cracked just a little. Crow made a quick decision, one that would follow him for the rest of his life. "Wait here," he said. "I need to show this to the president." Elvis sat down. And that was the first breach. Civilians do not sit in the West Wing lobby without being invited. But Elvis didn't know. Or maybe he knew and didn't care. His shoulders slumped as if he was finally letting himself rest after carrying something heavy for far too long. A young aide named Michael walked past, froze, and nearly dropped his folder. "Elvis Presley?" Elvis smiled politely. "Yes, sir." Even in that moment, even dressed like a king from another world, he seemed strangely small, like a man hoping someone would tell him he still mattered. Michael hurried away. The sound of his shoes echoed down the hall. A few minutes later, Crow reappeared, his face tight. "The president will see you," he said. That alone was shocking. Nixon rarely made same-day decisions, almost never met surprise guests. But something about Elvis's letter, or his timing, or his desperation, had pushed the president to say yes. Elvis stood quickly, smoothing his velvet sleeves. Crow motioned for him to follow. They walked down the long corridor toward the Oval Office. The quiet was so perfect you could hear Elvis breathing. Then something unexpected happened. As they reached the door, an older Secret Service agent stepped in front of Elvis, holding a hand out like a barrier. "Sir, before you enter, we need to know exactly what you're carrying." This was routine, but Elvis hesitated. His eyes flicked toward the inside of his coat. His fingers twitched. Crow frowned. "Is there something else we should know about Elvis?" A long pause filled the hallway. Elvis swallowed. "I brought a gift. For the president." Crow's eyebrows rose. "What kind of gift?" Elvis didn't answer right away. He shifted his coat slightly, and a small shape pressed against the velvet from underneath. Not bulky, but definitely solid. The air snapped tight. The Secret Service agent stepped closer. "Sir, what is that?" Elvis's voice went low. "It's nothing dangerous. I promise." But no one moved. Another agent joined in. The tension became heavy, sharp, like glass. Even the hallway lights felt hotter. Elvis's breath fogged in the cold draft from the back door. His hand hovered near his coat. A gift. Inside the White House. Inside the president's wing. Inside his coat. This could go wrong fast. A single thought flashed through Crow's mind. Please don't let him pull it out here. Elvis's shoulders rose and fell. He finally said, "I'll show the president, if that's all right." It was not all right, but the agents exchanged looks. They didn't want a scene right outside the Oval Office. If Elvis caused panic, reporters might sniff something out. So, with deep hesitation, the older agent stepped back half a step and said, "Fine, but do not reach into your coat unless told." Elvis nodded, serious now. Crow pushed open the door. A warm orange glow from the lamps spilled into the hallway. Nixon sat behind the resolute desk, flipping through a morning briefing. Elvis took one step inside. And in that quiet moment, before anyone spoke, before Nixon even looked up, Elvis broke the second protocol. He walked straight in without waiting to be formally invited. The door shut behind Elvis with a soft thump. The Oval Office felt warmer than the hallway, almost too warm. Lamps glowed softly. Christmas decorations lined the fireplace. But there was a sharpness in the air that cut through the cozy scene. Nixon finally looked up, expecting a formal greeting. Instead, Elvis stood only a few steps away, closer than any civilian should ever be to a sitting president. Nixon blinked. "Mr. Presley?" Elvis nodded once. "Thank you for seeing me, sir." His voice was steady, but his hands were tense at his sides. Crow hovered near the door, unsure whether he should step forward or keep still. The Secret Service stood frozen, ready to leap at the slightest wrong move. Nixon gestured toward the chairs in front of his desk. "Please sit." Elvis didn't wait. He moved instantly, dropping into the seat with a heavy exhale. Another breach. One more step out of normal protocol. Nixon noticed the rush but said nothing. He simply folded his hands and watched Elvis carefully, like a teacher trying to understand a troubled student. The room hummed with silence. Elvis leaned forward. "Sir, I want to help this country. The young people. The ones getting lost." Nixon listened, face unreadable. Outside, traffic noise flickered faintly. Plane roared across the sky. The clock above the bookshelf ticked softly as Elvis poured out his worries. He spoke about drugs, fear, and losing the feeling of purpose. He spoke about fans who wrote letters begging him for guidance. He talked about the pressure of fame and how it hurt to see kids struggling. Then something shifted. Elvis stopped mid-sentence. His hand drifted toward the inside of his coat. Every agent in the room flinched. Crow inhaled sharply. Nixon's eyes narrowed. And Elvis said quietly, "Sir, I brought you something." Time froze. No one moved. No one breathed. Even the lights felt still. Nixon said, "Mr. Presley, what exactly did you bring?" Elvis slowly pulled open his coat. The velvet creaked. His hand slipped inside. Agents stepped forward. Crow whispered, "Elvis, don't." But Elvis kept moving. His hand emerged, holding something heavy, dark, and metallic. A Colt .45 pistol. The kind of gun never allowed inside the Oval Office. A weapon that had no place near a president. A gift no civilian was permitted to present. The room erupted in motion. "Sir, drop it!" an agent shouted. Nixon pushed back in his chair. Crow nearly lunged forward. But Elvis held the gun by the barrel, fingers far from the trigger, offering it gently like a fragile trophy. "It's unloaded," he said quickly. "It's safe, I swear. It's a gift, sir. For you. As a sign of loyalty." The agents didn't relax. Nixon didn't breathe. Elvis kept talking, words tumbling like stones slipping down a hill. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I want to help. I want to serve. This is a symbol. I brought it to show you I mean what I say." His voice cracked, just for a second. Tiny break. A small confession hiding behind fear. Nixon studied Elvis carefully, eyes narrowing. The president saw something the others didn't. Not danger. Not rebellion. Pain. Real pain. The kind a crowd of 20,000 couldn't fix. The kind applause couldn't drown. The kind a lonely hotel room made worse. The kind a man carries in silence because he thinks he's not allowed to fall apart. Nixon lifted a hand, silently signaling the agents to hold their positions. He stood slowly, walking around the desk until he was face to face with Elvis. The gun glinted in the warm light. Strange, wrong, out of place. Nixon looked at it, then at Elvis, then back at the trembling gift. A long moment passed. Finally, Nixon spoke. "You're carrying weight, Elvis. Heavy weight." Elvis lowered his eyes. "What would you have done?" he whispered. "If you were me?" No one answered. No one could. Nixon rested a hand on Elvis's shoulder, surprising everyone in the room. The president wasn't known for soft gestures. But something about this moment broke through his usual walls. Elvis exhaled shakily. The room softened. The agents stepped back gradually. The storm began to settle. But the strangest part of the day, the moment historians still argue about, the part no memo fully explains. That moment was only seconds away. For a few long seconds, the Oval Office didn't feel like the center of American power. It felt like a quiet room holding two tired men who had run out of places to hide their fears. Nixon stood close to Elvis, the Colt .45 still resting in Elvis's open hands. The warm lamp on the desk cast soft shadows across the carpet. Outside, the winter wind thumped faintly against the windows. Then Nixon did something that stunned everyone. He leaned in, close enough that only Elvis could hear him, close enough that the agents almost stepped forward again. And Nixon whispered, "If America listens to anyone right now, it might be you." Elvis froze. His breath caught. His shoulders trembled. The agents stared in disbelief. Crow blinked hard, unsure if he had heard correctly. Nixon wasn't known for gentle words. He wasn't known for comfort. He wasn't known for trusting outsiders. And yet here he was, speaking to Elvis like a man reaching out into a darkness they both understood. Elvis swallowed. His eyes watered, not tears, just the kind of sting that comes from being seen after too long. "You think so, sir?" he whispered. Nixon nodded once. "Ido." The air shifted. Something softened. Something broke open. That was the turning point. Nixon reached out and carefully took the gun from Elvis's hands. Not to scold him, not to have him dragged out, but to show that he accepted the gesture. The President of the United States held the gun for a moment, examining its polished surface, its engraved handle. It was beautiful, dangerous, symbolic. Then he placed it gently on the side table. The agents relaxed only slightly, but their eyes stayed locked on Elvis's hands. Nixon stepped back. "You're not here as an entertainer," he said. "You're here because you care, and I respect that." Elvis's lips parted. Not in a smile, but in something quieter, something that looked like relief. "I never wanted to just sing," he said. "I wanted to help people. I wanted to do something real." Nixon moved behind his desk, opened a drawer, and took out a small black box. Crow stiffened. He knew what was inside. He also knew this box wasn't supposed to leave the drawer without heavy paperwork, approval, signatures, and at least 3 phone calls. Nixon ignored all of that. He placed the box on the desk and opened it. A bright gold badge gleamed inside under the lamp. The metal caught on Elvis's reflection. The room seemed to glow around it. It was an official narcotics badge. The kind normally given only to federal agents. The kind Elvis was never meant to have. Nixon tapped the badge with his finger. "This is not a title," he said softly. "But it's something. Maybe it will give you strength." Elvis stared at it like he was looking at a piece of himself he thought he had lost years ago. His breathing quickened. A small sound escaped his throat, half laugh, half sigh. Nixon pushed the box toward him. "Take it." Elvis didn't move at first. His fingers hovered above the badge. His hands were shaking, the kind of trembling that happens when hope suddenly returns after being gone for a long time. "You're giving me this?" he whispered. Nixon nodded. "Yes." Elvis finally lifted the badge. His fingers closed around it slowly, almost reverently, like he was afraid it might vanish. He turned it over in his hands. The light danced across the edges. He seemed taller suddenly, stronger, like a weight had dropped from his chest. In that moment, Crow saw something he later wrote about in his personal notes. Elvis looked lighter, as if the world loosened its grip on him. Elvis stood up. The badge glowed against his velvet coat. He looked at Nixon with a strange mix of gratitude and disbelief. "I won't forget this," he said. Nixon nodded. "I know." For a second, the room was silent. No footsteps. No clicking radios. Just 2 very different men standing across from each other, bound by a small gold badge and a moment no one could have predicted. Then Nixon spoke again, quietly. "You just need someone to believe in you, Elvis. Even kings need that." Elvis's eyes softened. "Everyone does," he said. And just when the agents thought the strange moment had passed, Nixon added a final line. One that would stay buried in internal notes for years. "Don't let the world break you." Elvis didn't answer. But he held the badge tighter, like a lifeline he had been searching for far too long. Something important had shifted inside him. But what happened when he stepped out of the Oval Office left everyone speechless. Elvis stepped out of the Oval Office as if he were stepping into a new world. The hallway felt brighter than before, warmer, almost unreal. The gold narcotics badge was tucked safely in his hand, and he kept glancing at it like he was afraid it might disappear if he blinked too slowly. Each step he took felt different, lighter, steadier, like a man who had been walking uphill for years and suddenly found level ground. Crow walked beside him, unsure what to say. He had watched the entire meeting through stunned eyes. He had seen the gun, the whisper, the badge, and the strange quiet connection between two men who carried more weight than most people ever knew. Now, seeing Elvis walk with his shoulders relaxed made something tighten in Crow's chest. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was worry. Maybe both. Elvis paused near the hallway window. Outside, snowflakes were beginning to drift down softly over the White House lawn. His reflection in the glass looked different. He looked older, but somehow younger at the same time. "I didn't think he'd understand me," Elvis said quietly. Crow nodded. "Most people don't give the president a chance to." Elvis chuckled, just a small sound. "Most people don't walk in carrying a pistol." Crow almost laughed, almost scolded him, almost hugged him. Instead, he just shook his head. "You scared half the Secret Service." Elvis looked down at the badge again. It gleamed in the hallway light. His hands were still slightly shaking. Not from fear anymore. From meaning. From feeling seen. A pair of staff members passed by, whispering after they turned the corner. Elvis didn't notice. Or maybe he did, but it didn't bother him now. The badge was in his hand. The president's words were in his ears. Something inside him felt repaired, even if just for a moment. He touched the scarf around his neck. It fluttered as he walked again. The White House halls smelled like pine and old books. A small holiday wreath hung beside the door to the Roosevelt room. Elvis reached out and touched one of the red ribbons gently, like he was grounding himself, reminding himself he was really here. Crow stopped him before they reached the main lobby. "Elvis, whatever happens next, remember that you didn't imagine this. It was real." Elvis smiled slowly. "I know." But then his face softened with a question he didn't say out loud. What happens to a man after a moment like that? Does the world feel the same? Does he? As they entered the lobby, a draft rushed through the doors. Elvis shivered slightly. He slipped the badge into the inside pocket of his velvet coat, patting it once, as if promising it a safe place. Two Secret Service agents stood by the exit, still rigid, still watching. But when Elvis approached, one of them nodded respectfully. That small gesture meant more to him than he expected. Outside the glass doors, the cold afternoon waited. A small group of tourists lingered near the sidewalk, unaware that the man walking toward them had just experienced something that would echo through history. Elvis paused right before stepping out. He turned slightly toward Crow. "You ever feel like you're losing pieces of yourself?" he asked softly. "And you don't know how to stop it?" Crow hesitated. "Everyone does, Elvis. Even presidents." Elvis nodded. The wind pushed against the door. Snowflakes drifted in sideways. The world felt quieter, softer, changed. He stepped outside. The cold hit him sharply. But he didn't feel broken anymore. He felt like a man who had been handed a chance. Small, strange, impossible, and somehow exactly what he needed. The badge pressed warmly against his chest. But what that moment would mean for history, no one could guess yet. For months after that strange December meeting, no one outside the White House knew what had happened. There were no reporters waiting outside the gates. No headlines. No official statements. The moment lived only inside the memories of the men who were there. To the world, Elvis was still the king on stage. To President Nixon, he was something else entirely. A wounded fighter trying to stand tall. When the internal notes from that day were reviewed later, Crow stumbled upon a single scribbled line in Nixon's handwriting. It was written on the edge of a briefing memo, almost hidden in the margin. The ink had faded slightly, but the words still felt heavy. "That man is fighting battles we'll never fully understand. Crow stared at the sentence for a long time. He knew it wasn't meant for the public. It wasn't meant to flatter anyone. It wasn't even meant to survive history. It was simply the president's honest reaction, written in a moment of quiet reflection. And it shocked Crow, because Nixon rarely spoke about emotional matters. But Elvis had cracked something open in him. Years passed. The world changed. But the story of that day began to leak out through small corners. Notes, interviews, old recollections, a photograph that slowly became iconic. The picture of Elvis and Nixon shaking hands in the Oval Office started popping up everywhere. At first it looked like a simple snapshot, two famous men sharing a moment. But behind that smile was a meeting that almost spiraled into chaos, then turned into something strangely human. Historians were confused. Why had Nixon agreed to meet Elvis so suddenly? Why had he broken so many protocols? Why had he given a civilian a badge he wasn't allowed to give? And most of all, why had he written that line? That man is fighting battles we'll never fully understand. Some thought Nixon saw Elvis as a tool for public influence. Others believed he recognized the pain in Elvis's eyes because he carried his own. And a few historians said quietly, off the record, that Nixon might have felt sorry for him. Because power attracts loneliness. Fame attracts emptiness. And sometimes, powerful men see pieces of themselves in other powerful men. Elvis, meanwhile, kept the badge with him everywhere he went. It stayed in his coat on tour. It sat inside his bedside drawer at Graceland. It traveled with him through airports. He even showed it to a few close friends, tapping it gently with his finger like a secret promise. "The president believed in me," he once said, "even when I wasn't sure I believed in myself." A fan named Maria later wrote in her diary, after hearing the story, maybe that meeting kept him going a little longer. Her diary page survived inside an old fan club box, found years later at a garage sale in Memphis. And maybe she was right, because even the strongest people need a moment when someone, even a stranger, says, "I see you." The photo of Elvis and Nixon eventually became the most requested image in the entire National Archives. People laughed at it, studied it, made posters out of it, and turned it into a cultural mystery. But the truth behind that handshake wasn't funny or silly. It was fragile. It was human. It was two men holding themselves together the only way they knew how. Decades later, a small plaque was placed near the White House Visitor Center. It didn't tell the whole story. It didn't mention the gun. It didn't mention the whisper. It didn't mention the battles neither man could explain. It simply said, "Elvis Presley met President Richard Nixon here, December 21st, 1970. Just one line. But behind that one line lived a moment that changed them both. And its ripples are still felt today. In the years that followed, the world tried to explain what really happened inside the Oval Office that winter morning. Some people said Elvis broke protocol because he didn't understand the rules. Others claimed he did it on purpose. But the truth was softer, deeper, and more human than any rumor. Elvis didn't break protocol to show power. He broke it because he was scared of losing who he was. When he walked into the White House that day, he wasn't the king the world knew. He wasn't the man in the jumpsuit, or the star in the spotlight, or the voice that echoed through packed arenas. He was a man who felt himself slipping. Slipping from purpose. Slipping from control. Slipping from the world he once carried like it weighed nothing. He broke protocol because he needed help. Not from fans. Not from managers. Not from applause. From someone who understood pressure so heavy it could crush a person from the inside out. Nixon saw that, and that's why his whisper cut so deep. If America listens to anyone right now, it might be you. Those weren't political words. They were human words. They were the kind of words a broken man says to another broken man when he recognizes the weight he sees in those eyes. Some stories say that moment saved Elvis for a little while, gave him something to hold on to, something small but powerful, something no one else could have given him. Maybe it wasn't the badge. Maybe it wasn't the meeting. Maybe it was simply the feeling of being understood for the first time in a very long time. Why does it matter? Because even legends need to feel seen. Even kings need someone to say, "You still matter." And that's the part most people miss when they talk about that famous handshake. They see the two men smiling. They see the bold outfits. They see the strangeness of the pairing. They laugh. They wonder. They speculate. But they don't see what was really happening. Two lonely men, standing in a golden room, trying to hold themselves together with whatever pieces of strength they still had. Elvis walked into the Oval Office as a man afraid he was losing the country he loved. Nixon saw a superstar trying to be a soldier. Elvis saw a president trying to be steady in a world shaking apart. For a few minutes, they met in the same place, between fear and hope, between pressure and purpose. A place where rules bend, not out of disrespect, but out of desperation. And sometimes bending a rule is the only way two people can finally speak honestly. Elvis kept the badge close for the rest of his life. It wasn't official power. It didn't give him authority. What it gave him was something harder to define. A reminder that even at his lowest, someone believed in him. Nixon's memo later revealed the other side of that connection. That man is fighting battles we'll never fully understand. A line meant for no one to read. A truth meant to stay quiet. But history found it anyway, because history always finds the human pieces. And that's the real story behind Elvis breaking protocol. It wasn't about rules. It wasn't about danger. It wasn't about politics. It was about two men searching for purpose in a world that demanded too much from both of them. Decades later, fans still argue about what really happened. Some say the president changed Elvis. Others say Elvis changed the president. Maybe both are true. Maybe neither. But the emotional truth sits somewhere in the middle. Sometimes the most powerful moments in history happen when no one is watching. And sometimes, a simple whispered sentence can echo longer than any law, speech, or song. If the story moved you, share it with someone who still believes legends never struggle. Sometimes the strongest people carry the quietest battles. And if you remember where you were when you first saw that famous photo, tell us below. Your memory might unlock another untold piece of history.